So this is the first time that a voice will be used.
Fortunately not my voice because it is sad.
But we will be having a great top 10 storms of the year. Of course, this is just my pure opinion, and this video is not going to be fully professional, but rather semi-formal, though jokes here will be more common. Also, we will be covering only the storms that occur north of the equator, the northern hemisphere, where much of tropical activity took place. We should get started now. A Thai name meaning thunder of God.
Totally not Zeus, ahem ahem.
Here comes Typhoon Rammasun. But before anything else, let us go to the background of this storm, shall we? Typhoon Rammasun is a 2014 typhoon with its local Philippine name being Glenda. Fun fact, when I type the word Glenda, this immediately shows up. Without going into too much detail, Rammasun had 10-minute winds of 165 km per hour or 105 miles per hour, making it a regular typhoon based on Japan Meteorological Agency, but it had wind speed of 260 km per hour or 160 miles per hour, when using 1-minute sustained winds, making it a Category 5 super typhoon on JTWC scale.
Even though they just upgraded it but originally is just Category 4.
It had its lowest pressure of 935 millibars.
Even though it was observed in Xizhou, China, that it reached around 899 millibars.
It formed on July 9, near the Mariana Islands. Then it moved towards the Bicol region in Philippines as a Category 4 typhoon. Then it re-emerged into South China Sea, in which on July 18, favorable conditions allowed the storm to reach its peak intensity before making landfall in Haiyan Island, China. Rammasun was surely a large beast, isn't it? It killed a total of 222 people, half of those are in China and the other half from the Philippines. It caused around $8.03 billion worth of damages, putting it as the 10th costliest typhoon overall. It is also the 3rd costliest typhoon in the Philippines, causing around $885 billion, or roughly 38.6 billion pesos.
Hey!
Fun fact, it is the only typhoon to ever reach Category 5 in the South China Sea.
Why don't forget me.
And over 6 million people were affected by the typhoon, mostly in China and the Philippines. It was retired and replaced by Bualoy, with Glenda being replaced by Gardo as well. Yeah, that's Rammasun. If I said that silly squirrel in SpongeBob plus I mentioned the term superstorm, you may have an idea on this tropical cyclone. So if not, basically, this is Hurricane Sandy, or popularly known as Superstorm Sandy. First of all, Hurricane Sandy is a hurricane that existed on 2012, peaking as a Category 3 hurricane, the only Category 3 here in this list, spoiler alert, with 1-minute winds of 115 miles per hour, or 185 kilometers per hour, making it a Category 3 hurricane. It also had a low pressure of 940 millibars. It formed on October 22 in the Caribbean Sea, then it intensified to a Category 1 hurricane, making landfall in Kingston, Jamaica. It rapidly intensified to a Category 3 hurricane, making landfall in Cuba at peak intensity. And this is where the real crap begins. It became very disorganized that it is no longer considered fully tropical as it moved northward. Also, Sandy grew tremendously, becoming extremely large. It is 1,000 miles long, roughly the same distance from Miami to Washington, D.C. At this point it is a Category 1 hurricane, though it managed to re-strengthen to Category 2 for a short time, before finally reaching New Jersey as it turns extratropical on October 29. Sandy is like that monster who is normally pillaging the village, but suddenly it grew extremely huge and then it headed for a massive megalopolis. And this guy knows how it managed to, guess what, cause massive destruction. It killed 233 people, mostly in US and Caribbean. It caused a tremendous amount of damage to US alone, reaching up to $68.7 billion worth of damages, making it their second costliest hurricane ever recorded, after Katrina.
Outdated much?
Well, actually it is now just fifth after these hurricanes, but it is still extremely well known, and since the impact is so extensive, many relief efforts were undertaken. Sandy managed to knock off power wide scale as well, and it also damaged 200,000 homes, affecting tens of millions of people. It was retired and replaced with Sarah, not Sarah. Overall, this hurricane is considered the real superstorm of 2012, but of course it has its cousins such as the Cambodian term for flower.
It's Khmer.
And probably Haiyan, but much lower. This is Typhoon Bopha. Let's see how this typhoon looked like. Typhoon Bopha is formerly known in the Philippines as Pablo. It occurred the same year and roughly 1 month after Hurricane Sandy did, which is 2012. Bopha had 10-minute peak winds of 185 km per hour, or 115 miles per hour, and 1-minute winds of 280 km per hour, or 175 miles per hour, making it a Category 5 super typhoon. It also had pressure of 930 millibars. Bopha formed on November 25, far from any major landmass. Like most typhoons in later period of the year, it is located much closer to the equator. It managed to strengthen rapidly to a Category 4 typhoon from Category 1 in less than 18 hours, and located 5 degrees north of the equator due to stadium effect. It eventually strengthened to a Category 5 super typhoon before making landfall in Mindanao. There has never been a strong as this typhoon to ever make landfall this south, right?
Why, don't forget me. By the way, I am the strongest landfalling typhoon in Mindanao before.
After landfall it actually managed to strengthen again in the South China Sea to a Category 4 before eventually disintegrating into existence. Tremendous loss of life and damages in a generally less typhoon-affected areas is observed at the aftermath of the typhoon. It caused almost $1 billion worth of damages in the Philippines, making it the second costliest Philippine typhoon ever recorded. It also killed a lot of people, roughly around 1,901 in Mindanao and Visayas. It is like a much stronger sendong that struck last year, and pretty sure there won't be any repeat of this, right?
Don't get me started.
Also, it is the strongest typhoon and closest to the equator at the same time, reaching 7.3 degrees N at peak intensity. Both Bopha and Pablo are retired and replaced by Ampil and Pepito. No, Pablo is a Pagaza name, and it is different from Hurricane Pablo of 2019. Now here is a more recent storm. Happening just recently in 2018, Mangkhut is a word that sounds like a man with a more stylized sound of cut, but it actually means mangosteen, in which this name replaces Durian back in 2006.
Not Durian.
But on the storm itself, Typhoon Mangkhut is one of the strongest typhoons of the year 2018. Here's a look. Typhoon Mangkhut, known in the Philippines as Impong, has affected quite diverse areas in the typhoon belt. First of all, it had 10-minute winds of 205 km per hour, or 125 miles per hour, and 1-minute winds of 280 km per hour, or 180 miles per hour. It had a very low pressure of 905 millibars, though still a bit higher than some others. Mangkhut formed on September 6 and like a typical typhoon, it moved westward and began intensification. Mangkhut passed near Guam and Mariana Islands as intensifying typhoons. It strengthened further and reached its peak intensity on September 12. It weakened a bit before making landfall in northern Luzon, still at Category 5 strength, making it a very hard landfall and strongest since Typhoon Haiyan. Weakening significantly, it continued in the South China Sea before making landfall near Hong Kong. Finally, it degenerated afterwards. Mangkhut's most severe impacts happened in northern Luzon and southeastern China, including Hong Kong and Macau. 133 people were killed and total of $3.77 billion worth of damage are caused by the typhoon. Much are located in southeastern China. In the Philippines, it caused around $627 million worth of damage, or 33.9 billion pesos, making it the fourth costliest typhoon in the Philippines on record, shy of those earlier with higher damages. However, much of Hong Kong and neighboring areas are affected, as it is the strongest typhoon to strike Hong Kong since Typhoon Ellen decades ago. The name Mangkhut was retired and the replacement name will be chosen in early 2020. Impong was retired and replaced with a bet.
If you have seen this image, it is totally not controversial.
You might have an idea on this storm, and you should. This is the strongest hurricane of the 2019 Atlantic hurricane season, Hurricane Durian. Hurricane Durian is an exceptionally strong hurricane that swept through Bahamas, the rest of Caribbean, and east coast of the United States. Hurricane Durian has winds of 185 miles per hour, or 295 km per hour, making it a very strong Category 5 hurricane. It also has a very low pressure of 910 millibars. Durian originated on August 24 and it kept its tropical storm strength before entering the Caribbean, where it finally strengthened to a hurricane. Durian is originally not expected to strengthen this much, but the odds managed to defy the forecasts. As it approaches the Bahamas and Florida, it just kept getting bigger. It managed to peak while in the Bahamas. Just look at this impressive picture. Afterwards, Durian slowly turned north, completely avoiding landfall in Florida. Instead, now a weak hurricane, it made landfall in North Carolina, and finally turning extratropical. Now this hurricane isn't the most destructive out of all the storms here, as it caused $4.68 billion worth of damages, and it only killed 79 people. This storm is still very majestic when it comes to its look, as you have observed in these photos. It is the costliest, however, in the Bahamas, where the hurricane struck. Destruction there is particularly bad. Also, I have found kinda silly posts, like this, which the literal adaptation, and this cake, which looks really good to be honest. Durian, as of 2019, is not retired yet, but it could soon.
Devin will replace it. No. It's Damon. No, it should be Darren. And blah blah.
Whatever, you decide what could replace this name. The The absolute beast that has almost most of its characteristics is topping the records, and may be a source of controversy too, Hurricane Maria. The name itself may sound noble, but it is far from their case. One of the worst hurricanes ever recorded. Let us proceed. Hurricane Maria is the second strongest hurricane of the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season in terms of wind speed, reaching peak winds of 175 miles per hour, or 280 kilometers per hour. It also had a very low pressure of 908 millibars, making it the most intense 2017 hurricane in terms of pressure. It formed on September 16, in the main development region, then it started to rapidly intensify. It became a Category 5 hurricane and made landfall in Dominica at that strength. That's strong. However, it weakened for a bit, but it managed to strengthen again to a much stronger hurricane, reaching its peak intensity. It made landfall in Puerto Rico afterwards, becoming the strongest to ever make landfall in the island since the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. Maria then moved into the Atlantic and reached its secondary peak of 125 miles per hour. It accelerated north while weakening slowly, and later it accelerated eastward before turning extratropical on September 30. In terms of impact, Maria is absolutely a very catastrophic hurricane for the Caribbean. It caused almost $91 billion worth of damage, and 98% of the damages happened at Puerto Rico alone. This makes Maria the third costliest tropical cyclone worldwide. The same thing goes to deaths. Officially it killed 3,059 people, but exact numbers are not determined due to the severity of the impact, and it has been a huge source of controversy. Look at Puerto Rico at the aftermath, and most still feel the effects of the hurricane till this day. When counting the official death toll, it ranks as their third deadliest hurricane ever recorded in the United States, and probably the worst hurricane to have ever impacted Puerto Rico in modern history. The name Maria was retired and replaced with Margot. Not Steve Harvey. That's a whole different thing. By the way, Hurricane Harvey is the most unexpected hurricane I have ever tracked, aside for few ones like Michael and maybe Pablo of 2019. Anyways, let us jump in. If you are an average citizen from US or an internet user elsewhere, you may have heard of this hurricane. This hurricane is the only hurricane in this list that is a Category 4 hurricane. It had winds of 130 miles per hour, or 215 kilometers per hour. Harvey has a quite low pressure of 937 millibars. It originated on August 17 as a typical tropical wave. It became Tropical Storm Harvey few days later, but it never got beyond that category as it reached the Caribbean. It fully degenerated to a tropical low. The end. How unfortunate for this weak system. Wait. No. 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 This is not possible. It regenerated. And is now intensifying. Not just intensifying. Rapidly intensifying. Now a Category 4 in the Gulf of Mexico, ready to make landfall in Texas. And so it did. Is it going to dissipate now? Wait, no. It stalled. Did not dissipate, but it is turning back. Very slowly. It really went slowly before finally emerging back to Gulf of Mexico, then it finally made its final landfall and dissipated. What a hurricane. Wait, no. It turned extratropical. You know that a storm like this will cause massive destruction. And so it did. Extensively. Around $125 billion, making it the costliest hurricane ever.
I said tied with me.
Fine Katrina. Deaths are lower, around 107. But notice it's stalling in Texas. That reminds me of Tropical Storm Allison back in 2001. With this amount of rainfall, ranging around 61 inches in peak accumulation, it basically becomes the wettest hurricane in United States. This amount of rainfall causes extreme flooding in Texan coast, particularly Houston, which eventually caused extreme destruction. Due to these, the name Harvey was retired and replaced with Harold. If you are from Florida, you will definitely remember this hurricane. This hurricane is also very powerful, like Hurricane Maria. Irma is your classical Cape Verde hurricane that becomes really strong and hits Florida and the Caribbean. Hurricane Irma is an absolutely intense and notable hurricane, with winds reaching up to 180 miles per hour, or 285 kilometers per hour, making it a Category 5 hurricane.
But it originally peaked at 185 miles per hour.
Originally it is stronger with winds of 185 miles per hour but got downgraded in reanalysis. Irma had a very low pressure of 914 millibars, the second most intense hurricane, behind only Maria, in terms of pressure. Irma is a Cape Verde type storm, which is a type of storm that forms off the coast of Cape Verde. It formed on August 30th, moving westward and rapidly intensifying to a major hurricane. Irma eventually reached Category 5 strength on September 5th, beginning its long and destructive passing of the Caribbean. Irma made landfall at northern coast of Barbuda at peak intensity, making it the 7th strongest landfalling Atlantic hurricane. It slightly weakened to a Category 4 but eventually regaining strength for a short period of time before eventually making landfall in Cuba. It weakened, emerged into the Straits of Florida and rapidly intensified again. It made landfall at Category 4 strength in Florida, before eventually degenerating completely. Both Irma and Maria are hurricanes that really stand off in the public because of immense strength and impact. But Irma directly made landfall in Florida, raising its notability further. Irma is an extremely damaging hurricane, causing over $77.16 billion worth of damage, although less than Maria, but it is still extremely high enough for it to become the 4th costliest hurricane ever recorded. It killed much less people than Maria did, with 52 direct deaths and 82 indirect deaths, but still pretty bad regardless. Irma did a lot of impressive records, such as easternmost hurricane with winds of 180 miles per hour, surpassing Hurricane David of 1979. Irma also had one of the longest times spent as a Category 5 hurricane. And Irma also had a very large ACE, or accumulated cyclone energy, at 64.9 units.
Well, we have more.
Irma was retired and replaced with Haiyan. Overall, this hurricane is a majestic but catastrophic Atlantic beast. You all know about this. Fun fact, this is the only East Pacific hurricane in this list. There is no other storm than Hurricane Patricia. Here's a look, why is this in the top? Hurricane Patricia is perhaps the strongest tropical cyclone ever recorded worldwide in terms of winds.
Hello there.
Pretty sure Typhoon Nancy of 1961 is also extremely strong, but quite old and hard to reanalyze. It had winds of whopping 215 miles per hour, or 345 kilometers per hour. Yes, this is how strong Patricia is. And it is just as extremely intense as its pressure. Reaching up to 872 millibars, this is the second most intense tropical cyclone ever recorded officially, just behind the mighty Typhoon Tip of 1979, the most intense of all. With these numbers, this makes Patricia the strongest and most intense hurricane ever recorded. Yes, hurricane, in Western Hemisphere. And here's how it becomes such an intense storm. It formed on October 20, 2015 as a typical East Pacific storm, but before that, it was actually a tropical disturbance in Caribbean Sea. It continued until entering very favorable conditions. It began to dramatically intensify at an extreme rate. In a 24-hour span, wind increased by 125 miles per hour, the fastest intensification ever observed by National Hurricane Center. It then reached its absolute intensity that I mentioned, in which it could have been even stronger if deeper analysis is conducted at the time of the peak. Eventually, it would have, and it finally made landfall in Mexico, rapidly degenerating. Despite the extreme meteorological records I mentioned, it managed to cause not apocalyptic damages, but quite moderately high. It caused around $462.8 million worth of damages, mostly in Mexico. Not the costliest, but a modestly high amount. Fatalities are actually very low, only 8 directly killed by the hurricane. I have mentioned the extreme meteorological records in winds and pressure. Adding to that, it also had an extreme drop of pressure of 95 millibars in span of a day. Also, despite weakening, Patricia is actually the strongest landfalling hurricane in the Eastern Pacific region in terms of pressure, at 932 millibars. So yeah, it is also retired and replaced with Pamela. Overall, this hurricane is also very unexpected. But the king of tropical cyclones will always be. The king of tropical cyclones is here, and is also crowned as the storm of the decade, no other than Super Typhoon Haiyan, known as Yolanda in the Philippines. Almost every tropical cyclone enthusiast knows this, and every Filipino will never forget this typhoon. Literally means petrel, a species of a bird, in Chinese. Typhoon Haiyan is one beast of a tropical cyclone with everything brewing just right for the typhoon, but too bad for the affected. It had 10-minute winds of 230 km per hour, or 145 miles per hour, and 1-minute winds of 315 km per hour, or 195 miles per hour. Not the strongest, but it is considered as the strongest on 2013. It had an official Japanese estimate of 895 millibars.
Well, with reconnaissance aircraft and better analysis, it might have been stronger than the current estimate.
By the way, Haiyan is said to have reached as low as 870 millibars, others say even lower estimates, others say it is higher. Regardless of that, Haiyan is still considered as the strongest landfalling tropical cyclone ever recorded, tied with Typhoon Mangkhut of 2016. But we'll discuss how and Haiyan become Haiyan we know today. Totally not Haiyan of 2007, which is extremely weak. It formed on November 3 as your typical West Pacific storm. Now, it intensified. Not very rapid unlike Patricia, but it constantly intensified and continued to intensify until landfall, making its intensity extremely intense. Of course, a very favorable environment conditions helps in the process. It passed Palau after reaching Category 5 strength. But afterwards, it did not stop, and it continued to intensify even further. It reached its peak intensity before making landfall in Haiyan, eastern Samar in the Philippines. To this point, Haiyan had winds of 195 miles per hour, had an extremely large structure and almost looked annular. The king of tropical cyclones has finally made landfall on November 7, and if you think it will rapidly weaken, no, it did not rapidly. Rather, it did slowly weaken. The landmass is not enough to cause rapid weakening, unlike in most typhoons. Emerging into the South China Sea, it only weakened to Category 4, though environmental conditions do not support intensification anymore. So it kept weakening. As it reached Vietnam, it is now only a weak typhoon, and after landfall, it dissipated. What a journey of the King of Kings! It should be declared that Haiyan caused tremendous disaster. While it is true, it is more than just a disaster, but an absolute life-changing event for the most affected areas. First of all, their damages. It is the costliest typhoon ever recorded in the Philippines, causing over 95.5 billion pesos worth of damage, or around $2.2 billion. It is twice the second costliest typhoon, which is Typhoon Bopha or Pablo. The rest of the damages are in China, which is actually quite extensive too, and Vietnam, having a total of $2.98 billion worth of damage. Now, Haiyan is also the deadliest Philippine typhoon ever recorded in modern times. Around 6,352 are officially listed fatalities, and 1,071 are missing. Much of these deaths and damages are located in eastern Visayas, where their storm originally made landfall. And the leading factor is the massive storm surge that struck nearby major cities such as Tacloban. Storm surges as high as 6 meters struck the densely populated areas, and along with extreme winds and rainfall, it managed to toss cars in long distances, completely destroy buildings and even move the biggest boulders, in which it can move up to 180 tons, which is the heaviest ever moved by a tropical cyclone. With all of these, hence two things. First is the massive devastation of families affected. Most families in the area have some of their relatives at least killed, drowned or missing. Entire buildings are crushed down and even a ship is washed off. There were several reports of people miraculously surviving even at the most extreme cases. In the aftermath, many people were finding their families and friends and many were starving, looking for help. Second, is the response and legacy. Many organizations and countries around the world came to donate food, supplies and millions of money for the recovery. And even after that, the area has never fully recovered from the typhoon, and everyone there will never forget it. Total of 1 million people are directly affected by the typhoon. And that is what the king of tropical cyclones brought. Eventually, Haiyan is retired and replaced with Bailu, and Yolanda is retired and replaced with Yasmin. And yes, a never-forgotten storm that should be the storm of the decade.
So overall, that concludes my personal top 10 storms of the decade in the Northern Hemisphere. Take note that we have covered storms in 2010-19 only. Future storms may be even worse or not after this video is uploaded.
Also, there are too many notable storms to include. I have only picked the most notable ones. So it should end here. Happy New Year, and let us open ourselves for a new decade of tropical cyclone tracking. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and check my other videos. Cheers.